So once again, everyone, thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon to come and join our webinar. So what we're talking about today is really 2026. What are the opportunities and the challenges that this year is going to bring? So we'll talk about building, scaling, and securing your organizations. And of course, inevitably, AI is going to be in the mix as well. But we'll really focus on, how do we build forward for this year? So here's a little agenda, what we're going to go through. I will obviously give my introduction, and then we'll talk about what we see in terms of 2026's threat landscape. So what's out there on the horizon? What have we seen as an organization? The conversations that I've had, the conversations that my team have had, we've built those into a series of things we think are going to happen in 2026. We'll look at some of the upcoming regulations as well. So some of you may well be aware that there's quite a lot happening in the regulatory space now around cyber. So we'll cover some of those off, look at some of the impacts that those are going to potentially have, but also what opportunities they're going to bring for businesses moving forward. Supply chain is a big talking point. It was last year and it will continue to be this year as well. So we've called that out in a bit more detail, understanding, how supply chain affects businesses, the steps that we can take and that you can take to help protect your businesses, and some recommendations around that. We'll also cover off business resilience. So this is, again, very much a theme for 2026. Organizations are really moving away from that traditional sort of, shields up, hardened defense, much more to a resilience type situation. Some of the regulations as well that are sort of starting to mandate is this as well. So we'll talk about resilience in more detail, what it means, how you can start to build resilience within your organizations. And finally, we'll look at setting your strategy for this year. So what we think, based on our experience, the sort of the main points needs to be around that. And also, the business case for it, how you tie that into the board, what we see, board demanding in terms of their, strategies. So there's quite a big piece all around strategy as well. So that's what we're going to run through this afternoon. As I said, we will have time, hopefully, for questions at the end as well. So do continue to submit those via the Q&A function. So very quickly about me, that's what I look like. I'm Director of Cyber Risk Management here at CyberOne. So I look after our entire consulting portfolio, and also I support our incident response team in the work that they do. Quick background about me, I have more than 20 years now of cyber security experience across multiple domains. Started my career very much in the law enforcement and investigation space, doing lots of interesting things for national police forces, local police forces, international law enforcement. So that was quite an interesting time. Moved on from there into much more into the incident response space. So that brought me much more into the commercial world. And from there, moved into consulting, really understanding in-depth security frameworks, the challenges that business face when it comes to managing their cybersecurity programs, having those board level conversations, helping customers get investment for security programs. Some of the challenges we faced, back then are no different today, as I'm sure many of you will be aware. But a lot of my experience is across, as I said, multiple domains, a lot of various shapes and sizes of organizations as well, from small single-figure organizations all the way up to big globally distributed enterprises. So I've had the luxury, I should say, of seeing cybersecurity at all scales. So hopefully, today I can impart a little bit of that experience to everybody attending. So 2026, I know we're only a month in. So, what we thought we'd do is have a look moving forward at what we see some of the key threats being, the key things that, we will certainly be talking about to our customers, and hopefully, you'll already be thinking of internally, as to, how you detect, how you defend from these kind of threats. So we've got five key things that we feel are going to be themes as we move through 2026. Again, apologize. I know everyone's sick of hearing about AI, but like it or not, it's here. People are using it both positively and negatively. We'll cover all these in a bit more detail in subsequent slides. Um, Second on the list here, geopolitical tensions. I think no one should be under any illusion, certainly given the press that's been happening recently, just how much the current political landscape can influence cyber attackers as much as cyber defenders as well. Um, Cyber attacks in the press. 2025 was really a watershed year, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of cyber attacks hitting the mainstream. Obviously, we had some high street names involved in cyber attacks, but we'll have a look at what that means moving forward into 2026. Fourth on the list, quantum computing. So, very interesting topic, well beyond the scope of today's presentation to go into anything apart from scratching the surface of it. But it is very, very much, something that is coming, something that's on the horizon. And again, we'll touch on what that means for businesses and organizations this year, let alone in years to come. And then finally, as I mentioned, we'll have a look at regulations. So in particular, regulation now is starting to catch up with all these technologies. So, for the past few years, some of this stuff's been running wild, if you like, a bit of a wild west approach to certain things, especially AI. But we are now seeing regulators, governments, lawmakers starting to catch up with the technology and issue regulations to start to control some of what we're seeing. So let's dive into some of that in a bit more detail, starting with everybody's favorite topic, AI. Um, we are now at the point where AI is pretty much a viable solution for a defined set of use cases. So AI offers both attackers and defenders previously unparalleled ability to operate at scale and speed. That's the real differentiator with AI. Previously, if you were an attacker, you'd either have to have some automation set up to run your campaigns, to target your attacks. A lot of what you were doing potentially would be manual operations. So, there was only a limited amount of bandwidth that you, as a bad guy, in inverted commas, could actually to deal with. Now, defenders and attackers have the ability to operate at scale. AI and large language models have absolutely accelerated on both sides of the fence the ability for us to not only defend against attacks, but also for the attackers to launch new and novel ways of trying to get into our organizations. In particular, for the threat actors, what does that mean? Well, that's a lower barrier to entry. Previously, even the most sort of low-skilled threat attacker, your kind of typical script kiddie, if you like, would need to have some kind of technical knowledge, even if they were just working off of previously published exploits or code that may have been available on a dark web marketplace. Now AI has really enabled pretty much anyone who's interested in launching an attack. Faster deployments to attacks as well. So the time to actually execute on objectives for a lot of attackers is really, really shrunk down. Anecdotally, the quickest attack that we've seen, AI-enabled attack we've seen, was 2 minutes and 7 seconds. So that was a confirmed use of AI in an attack. So to go from the initial scoping, the initial probing of a customer's external infrastructure to actually acting on objectives was only 2 minutes. Not so long ago, you'd probably be looking at 2 days for an attack path, but now that order of magnitude has come down quite significantly. So that just gives you an idea of what we're dealing with from the blue team side. Agentic AI as well, so self-managing attacks. So again, Previously, we would have seen probably an individual or team of individuals as one of these threat actor groups trying to manage the access that they have, trying to exploit the targets, all that kind of stuff. Now we are very much seeing that shift to automating a lot of that. So really, again, that ramp up, that operation at scale. On the defender side, on the blue team side, obviously that gives us opportunities as well. So tooling, so the kind of platforms that many of us use, scene tools, all these kind of things, we are now starting to see that these are genuinely becoming, useful in terms of their AI integration. For the past couple of years, lots of vendors have been talking about it, but now we actually see that starting to mature as a serious offering. So AI is allowing the defensive team to respond at speed, and we see that continuing throughout the course of this year as well. AI models only get better the more you train them. So the more that they're used and deployed in organizations, the better they will be at understanding, what they need to do for you as an organization, what normal looks like for you, for your business. And the more we can train them, the better they will be at triaging incidents and responding at machine speed. Obviously, there's still very much a role for the human being in the loop, but what AI enables us to do as a defensive team is filter out a lot of the noise, get to conclusions a lot quicker, and help us come to those kind of, those critical decision points. So when we're talking about, attackers having a scale of 2 minutes to act on their objectives, we need to be equally as fast, if not faster, when it comes to defending that as well. So very much, a big thing for a lot of security organizations this year. AI native security tooling, so not just on the perimeter, not just in that sort of defensive capability, but also within environments. So looking at things like configurations, vulnerabilities, all those kind of traditional security practices that we know and love. We will be able to operate those at scale as well with AI enablement. So whereas historically everyone's run a vulnerability scan on a frequency that suits them as an organization, using AI to do it much more proactively, to come up with remediation plans, to even decide if or give you guidance on are the particular vulnerabilities identified relevant for your organization, give you that extra level of detail, and misconfigurations. So all this kind of stuff at the basic scale is all number crunching, data processing. That's what large language models are very good at, and AI is very good at, is taking large corpus of data and turning it into actionable items for businesses and security teams to look at. So again, we will absolutely see AI across the board when it comes to security, both on the offensive and the defensive side as well. And finally on here, large language models and AI itself is also going to increasingly be an attack vector into organizations. We have seen in this past year, in 2025, quite a few proof of concept attacks against large language models. They've been sort of tricked, should I say, into disclosing, sensitive company information and various other, data that shouldn't have ever left an organization. So there is absolutely a piece on, securing a use of AI within organizations, setting policies, putting the guardrails in place. AI is still a tool. It's the same as any other tool. So all the basics still apply to it in terms of, making sure it's secure, it doesn't have access to data, it doesn't need to, all that kind of stuff. So that's the AI arms race. Let's have a look at geopolitical tensions. So in 2025, we saw that 51% increase in hacktivism. So these are hacking groups or individuals who have specific goals related to whatever is happening in the world. So there was an enormous increase. Again, last year was very busy politically, and a lot of organizations felt that they needed to, take up cyber arms to support whatever cause it was they were supporting. So geoeconomic conflict and state-based conflict are really going to be two top risks for 2026. So if your organization potentially works in this space, definitely something to be considerate of. A lot of threat groups are actively targeting organizations they feel that doesn't directly support their cause or has come out in support of the other side, whatever it is. Human psychology is a wonderful thing, but the motivations for these people ultimately mean that their frustrations get expressed in terms of hacking. So, what does this actually mean? So, there's a continued increase in misinformation and disinformation. So out there in the wide world, social media is a wonderful thing, but unfortunately, it does mean that there's a lot of information floating around on those platforms that potentially is going to be harmful for an organization. There's the insider threat to think of as well when it comes to that space. Um, a favorite of hacktivism groups is absolutely operational technology and industrial control systems, so OT and ICS. Very much a hot target for hacktivist groups. So again, if you have any of that within your organization, I'm sure you've been looking at securing it anyway, but this is absolutely the time to really double down on those efforts. None of this stuff should be exposed to the internet. Unfortunately, we know that that's not always the case. And if one of these hacktivist groups finds something like this, they will absolutely do their best to make your lives a misery. Finally, on here, state-directed ecosystems. So these are, yes, your typical global players on the stage, without mentioning any names. Um, Obviously, these aren't necessarily directly state-sponsored attacks, but they are state-directed. So there are a lot of groups who are working on behalf of nation states seeking to disrupt, the other side, if you like, especially, as we see various conflicts around the world. This is very much a big part of what's happening out there. So threat intelligence is absolutely key, to help you understand if your organization is going to be at risk, and then obviously you can start to plan how you defend against that as well using that intelligence. So, normalization of cyber attacks. As I mentioned at the start of the session, last year, many headlines around high street names and high street well-known organizations that were attacked, breached, whatever you want to call it. The National Cybersecurity Centre did a great job in tracking and supporting a lot of these. Last year, there were 204 nationally significant cyber attacks. So this is not the sort of targets against normal businesses, if you like, but these were targets against attacks, sorry, against critical national infrastructure, big, sort of tier one banks, all that kind of stuff. So the real sort of key players, movers and shakers, if you like. So the expectation for 2026 is that this is absolutely going to continue. No surprises there. However, what does that mean for us in the cybersecurity world? Well, familiarity is a dangerous thing. If customers, boards, the general populace get more and more immune to cyber attacks, it actually makes our job slightly more difficult. People start to see it as just a normal thing, a normal risk that we go through in everyday life. So for us as security providers of security, working in security teams, we really have to work hard to keep the security messaging going, to help our boards, to help executive teams, to help budget holders understand that it shouldn't be an inevitability that we get attacked. We don't want to be the next headline. We don't want that to happen to our customers, to our organization. So we need to keep that messaging going internally, to help the business understand that, yes, other organizations have got hit, but we really don't want that to happen to us, for reasons that obviously we all know, and I will touch on a little bit later as well. Quantum computing. So as I mentioned, quantum is it's still not here. It's talked about a lot as the next big thing, and it absolutely will be. Reasons being is the first company, the first organization that cracks quantum computing stands to be absolutely the market leader, and commercially would stand head and shoulders above their rivals, which is why we see such an interest in quantum, not only from a academic research perspective, but also from a commercial perspective. A lot of organizations, Google, Microsoft, IBM, to name but a few, have massive quantum programs going on. So there is a lot of money floating around in here. So as it says on the slide, general use quantum is still some way off. Even the most optimistic estimates are putting it, 10 years into the future. But what quantum has done is sort of raised the profile of post-quantum cryptography. So, looking at what the world will look like once quantum is available and up and running. There has been a serious amount of work done on post-quantum cryptography, excuse me. Quite a few big organizations, national bodies, particularly in America, have released guidance around post-quantum. I believe yesterday, so after these slides, sorry, were put together, the CISA over in America put together a really good list of what they consider to be post-quantum secure encryption algorithms or quantum resistant algorithms. Microsoft again have started implementing quantum resistant algorithms across their product stack. So a lot of this stuff is starting to emerge. So it might not be an immediate problem for today, but as we saw with SSL and TLS and those kind of algorithms a few years ago, a lot of that, a lot of those technologies get embedded into projects or are in legacy systems, and becomes very difficult to unpick those, without introducing vulnerabilities before it's too late. So I suppose the idea here is have a look at your own stack. Where's the data that you've got that's encrypted? How is it protected? Is it something that, if it was decrypted in 2 or 3 years' time, would still cause you a problem? How are you going to secure that moving forward? I know, 10 years' time in the future seems a long way away, but depending on the kind of data that you're storing, what you're doing as an organization, you may have a requirement to store that data for more than 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, financial records, things like that. So definitely something to start thinking about now, as a concept of harvest now, decrypt later. So a lot of attackers will just be, exactly as it sounds, harvesting that information and then waiting for the ability to decrypt it. So if you're in that space, if you've got sensitive data that is protected at the moment, but might not be in a few years' time, start having a look at quantum resistant algorithms now. They're available, they're working, so it could be a strategy moving forward. And finally, we'll have a look at cybersecurity regulations. The UK's Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill was finally introduced to Parliament at the end of last year. Really focused on critical national infrastructure, but is expanding on the NIS regulations to cover data centers and managed service providers. There's a big push on supply chain as part of the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. So even if you're not an operator for essential services, so even if you don't come into scope directly, if you're part of a supply chain to somebody that does, some of these requirements are going to flow down to you. So definitely something to have a look at. Ask the question internally, have we got any customers like that? If you have, then definitely start looking at what the requirements are going to be, because there's some quite stringent rules around instant reporting, risk management, all that kind of stuff as well. The EU AI Act. So for those of you that haven't heard of it, for anyone based in Europe. If you develop or deploy AI tools within the EU, then this is something you're going to need to be aware of. It's a way of ranking riskiness of AI, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and some controls around, how you do it, how you train your data, what you are allowed to do, aren't allowed to do, all that kind of stuff. And we are expecting in the second quarter of this year what they call support instruments to help people comply with the act. So that's going to be things like questionnaires, implementation guides, all that kind of stuff. Moving on, so there's going to be a new version of the Cybersecurity Act, again for the EU in particular. So if you're operating over there, some of these regulations may apply to you, even if you're not headquartered in the EU. Potentially, if you're offering services to EU-based customers, you will fall into scope. So once again, you can see the themes here: supply chain risks. So there is absolutely a big focus on supply chain as part of this, including vulnerability declaration and reporting. So if you, for example, are a software developer, or you develop any kind of online product or service, if you have a test and that uncovers a vulnerability, potentially you are mandated to report that centrally. So, definitely something to be aware of, because it's no longer a case of just fixing it in-house. You have an obligation to report back, so it becomes disclosable in terms of vulnerability. So that's a really interesting thing to see, actually. And finally, NIS2, this is really just a minor set of updates. Obviously, in the UK, we're going to have the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, which is replacing NIS2 or building on NIS2. But over in Europe, there are going to be some minor updates to align with the Cybersecurity Act, as we mentioned above, but also what they call single entry reporting. So this is going to mean where you do have an incident, it will be a single place in which you report that. So in the UK, for example, under the Cybersecurity Bill, you'll report to your nominated regulator for whatever industry you work for. I think there's ridiculous. I think that's 17 regulators or something like that in the UK. Over in Europe, though, with there's two updates, there will just be a single portal for that. So again, just a minor update. Okay, so moving on from all the predictions for this year, let's actually have a look at how we can translate some of that into actionable items that we can look at within our own organization. So supply chain risk, as you may have picked up on, is a big theme for this year. Interestingly, according to the government cyber breaches survey, 86% of businesses haven't reviewed their immediate supply chain risk. So the breaches survey is a really, really interesting set of data, because it cuts across not only SMEs, but also larger businesses, charities, and a big range of sectors as well. So 86% haven't looked at their supply chain risks. And it's understandable why, right? Supply chains are often large, they're often complex, they can be very old and long-standing relationships in there from a business perspective. So there is a lot to unpick within supply chain. Interesting thing with supply chain is, though, sometimes there can be inherent vulnerabilities in there, depending on how you interact with your supply chain, what data they have access to, and those vulnerabilities potentially can be introduced or exploited at any point within the supply chain. So you've not only got your immediate suppliers, but there's potentially third party, fourth party suppliers. Depending on how long your chain is. You can find yourself in a really, really interesting situation in terms of understanding, where your risks and where your vulnerabilities absolutely exist. So it can be, yeah, as we say here, very difficult to know just how protected you are across the supply chain. As we saw with some of the some big headline cyber attacks from last year. Supply chain was absolutely the route into those organizations. We're having conversations with customers yesterday, even, which is a really interesting one. They'd released a piece of PR content out to the press, announcing that they were working with how can I phrase this, with a globally well-known soft drinks manufacturer, if that makes sense. So not the organization themselves weren't making soft drinks, but they were, going to be involved in their supply chain. And literally within the space of half an hour of that piece of press going live, they saw a huge spike of people probing not only their domains but also their external infrastructure, already looking for weaknesses and vulnerabilities, purely based on the strength of a press release. Supply chain absolutely is seen as a key way into organizations. And a lot of threat actors are actively looking for, insider support within supply chains. So people that are working at organizations that, that supply their final targets are being actively incentivized to try and give access, credentials, install malicious software, all this kind of stuff. So, the attackers are very much seeing the weaknesses within the supply chain. We as security professionals need to do something about it. Um, yeah, and as we mentioned in the regulation part as well, for the cybersecurity and resilience bill, definitely hot on managing third parties, managing the risk within the supply chain. The NCSC have some great documentation about it as well. A really good set of information on, how to manage supply chain risk, where to start, all that kind of stuff. So very much worth looking at if you feel that's a risk for your own organizations. So, some quick recommendations then. How would we actually go about assessing and managing risk within the supply chain? So, absolutely the place to start is understanding your business from top to bottom. So what's the organizational risk appetite that you have? I don't know, where's the crown jewels of your business? What is it that you can't do without? What piece of information or what set of data is it that you absolutely rely on to do what it is you do to make money as a business? What is it that you're looking to protect the most? Um, and how does everything build around that? So how do various departments interact with it? Who has access to it? Do they need to have access to it? There's a whole bunch of questions, but really starts with, fundamentally understanding, if this piece of data went missing, would it be the end of our business? And that's what you're seeking to protect. So next, understand supply chain and how it reaches into that data, those crown jewels, if you like. So start by mapping out all of your suppliers, relevant people. So that can be people internally, who owns the supply chain, who owns those relationships. What do the processes around that look like? So, how are those organizations tapping into you? Are there API links, for example? Do you have data exchange? Is stuff being sent back and forth via email, heaven forbid? Or do you have, some other process by which they're engaging with you? Obviously, it's not going to be the same for everybody. So that's where security profiles come into play. Not all suppliers are the same. Some of them are just selling you pens and envelopes or restocking the coffee machine or whatever it is. In which case, the cybersecurity requirements for organizations like that will be less strenuous than, organizations that have direct access into your production database and, you're sharing data with for whatever reasons. So tier your suppliers, understand, the security profiles. We generally recommend at least sort of three security profiles, so tier one, tier two, tier three. And that should give you a great place to start when it comes to setting the expectations around each of those tiers. So, from a technical perspective, what do you expect? You should be applying at least a minimum expectation, I think, on most suppliers that they have the absolute basics, whether that's something like a cyber essential certificate or an ISO management system, some kind of minimum level of expectations, and then layer on top of that. So look at other, particular policies, but don't forget things like contractual expectations as well. So we often see this missing from supply chain risk. You need to make sure that you have the contractual ability to audit a supplier, to potentially to cancel a contract, if there is any security issues, or you need to be able to recover potentially costs from suppliers. So very important, not just to focus on the technical stuff, but also on the business side as well. And then comes the fun part. You actually can start to audit suppliers, whether that's via a questionnaire, whether it's an on-site technical assessment, whether it's a third-party service that you use to do that. Again, how you approach that is obviously based on how you work as a business, but you need to gain that reassurance that your suppliers are doing the right thing and they can evidence that to you as well. And then finally, obviously, we monitor and measure. So we look at, what your suppliers are telling you, how they're coming back, are they meeting requirements, are they not meeting requirements, and you go into that cycle and into that loop to make sure that they maintain that level of security that is expected, as well as internally, if your environment changes, if your security baseline changes, you need to make sure that your supply chain is aware of that and acting appropriately as well. So that's supply chain. That leads us nicely into business resilience, or cybersecurity resilience, I should say. So resilience, not by any means a new concept, but it is increasingly becoming important in a cyber world. So some of the questions, we need to ask ourselves are, what's the likelihood of a cyber attack? Everyone would like to think it's quite low, but as we talked about earlier in terms of the threat landscape, there's quite a lot of people out there who consider any shape or size of organization as a potential target. So the chance of a cyber attack happening is never zero. Very much depends on the space that you work in, the data that you have, even opportunist attacks as well. Sometimes the threat actors, as we see, will just have a go at anything that sticks out there on the internet. If there happens to be a misconfigured server, for example, then potentially you're going to be a target. The possible impact of that. So if your business was attacked, what's the impact going to be? Could you survive? Could you make do? Can you still operate if you were attacked? Obviously, not all attacks are equal. If it was just extortion, what would you do? If it was a full-on, denial of service attack, what would you do? If it was something like ransomware and your entire business was taken down, could you survive? What would the impact be? And then obviously, how can you prevent and or recover from that kind of attack? Do you have those kind of steps in place? Hopefully most people have instant response plans, have done some testing, have a decent set of security controls. But I think there's probably some honest questions to be asked to say, well, actually, could we really recover? Could we keep going? So resilience is very much taking that conversation into the board. It is a investment piece. So it does need investment from the business, and having that conversation at a board or equivalent level is all about protecting the long-term value and reducing the likelihood of any disruption, and ultimately, obviously, the cost of that disruption as well. Even a small cyber attack takes people's time and energy away from their jobs. Means other stuff can't get done. Systems go offline, all that kind of stuff. So even a best case scenario, even if you're claiming on insurance, some of those costs are going to be uninsured, and there will be an impact to the business. If you're looking for a true resilience program, that significant and sustained impact that resilience program is going to have absolutely has to have leadership buy-in. So whoever is on the board needs to fully understand the true value of having that resilience program. And equally, the board have a big role to play in setting the tone for cybersecurity within an organization. So cybersecurity culture is one of those wonderful things that we talk about. And, how do you embed a cyber positive culture into an organization? That's a whole nother presentation in its own right. But again, the real value we see in that, and we have seen in customers that embrace cybersecurity, is that it becomes a talking point at everyone's meetings, regardless of what people are doing within the organization. Cybersecurity is always on the agenda, and it's always something people are talking about, and that helps to build that that positive culture, which in turn develops resilience within an organization. So a little bit more in detail about resilience. So, what is it? Well, it comes from the concept of resilience engineering. So if you're building, critical systems like the planes, for example, you want to make sure that stuff doesn't fail, because obviously that's bad, especially in the case of an aeroplane. So you've got concepts of, risk management, which we all know and love, protective monitoring, business continuity, disaster recovery. All those still exist. So all the sort of traditional cybersecurity stuff is still absolutely valid within the resilience space. But what resilience aims to do is improve the organization's ability to anticipate, absorb, and recover from cyber attacks. So it's building on much more on the anticipatory aspect of it, rather than just hardening a shell like a turtle and retreating inside. You're actually planning and testing for the worst. So what does that look like? What does a proper resilience program look like? Well, if you're designing your systems to be resilient, you're typically looking at things like this. So infrastructure as code, sorry. That lets you rapidly and reliably replicate and rebuild systems and infrastructure. So if you have your infrastructure as a code defined, if something goes down or gets taken out as part of the cyber attack, it's very, very easy to stand it back up and reduce the impact of that attack. Immutable backups. So absolutely key data within the organization, as we all know, needs to be backed up. That's as old as IT itself. But we're not just talking about data when it comes to resilience. We're looking at things like key application platforms, identity management, hypervisors, configurations, cloud configurations, all the kind of supporting things for your infrastructure should be backed up. Not just backed up, but practiced and tested as well. So you need to have confidence that those backups can be restored at any given point in time. Obviously, the immutable nature of them means they shouldn't be changed and all that kind of stuff. But really, really important to continually test and practice that sort of backup recovery strategy. Segmentation, so absolutely, keeping logical and physical architecture separate as much as you can. So you don't have everything open to everyone, because believe me, if an attacker finds that, then it's game over for you as an organization. So either you separate that on an as needed basis. So if you're spinning like microservices up, for example, you spin them up in the right place within your organization, or via trust boundaries. So, that zero trust concept coming in. And also, when you've got segmentation, don't forget about your management plane. So don't have, a management plane that has access to everything. Your management plane needs to be segmented as well. So, again, if the worst came to the worst and someone got into like an administrator account that had access to a management plane, if they're in there, they see everything. So keep that segmented as well. Least privilege, absolutely. When you're building out and architecting systems, least privilege is very much the concept to apply. Again, that zero trust architecture, give people or identities the absolute minimum set of requirements that they need to operate, nothing more, nothing less. You can do just in time. Just in just in time upgrades for privileges and stuff like that if you need to, but everything absolutely everywhere should run with the minimum privilege required to help sort of minimize that blast radius, if you like, in event of an attack. Observability and monitoring. So you've got things like MXDR. So that enables that rapid observation and response to events. If you don't know what's happening within your environment, then how can you defend against it? So you need that visibility across your infrastructure across your infrastructure surface, comprehensive data collection as well. So not just, key points, key servers, as much as you can. So you're looking at hosts, infrastructure, your edge devices, cloud environments, application level stuff. Obviously, the more you collect, the absolute better in terms of, observing and monitoring the environment. And finally, chaos engineering. So this is deliberately introducing failure into the environment to actually validate all of the above points. So can you detect? Can you respond? Can you self-heal? Chaos Monkey, you may have heard of, is a great tool by Netflix, of all people, that literally they just run it within their environment, and the Chaos Monkey does what it says on the tin. It randomly switches off services, servers, applications, all that kind of stuff. It's a great way to test how resilient your infrastructure really, really is. It's free, by the way. It's on GitHub if you're really interested in it. But absolutely, testing that resilience by almost literally pulling plugs out of systems gives you that ultimate reassurance that you can survive. Your business can keep going in the worst case scenario. Conscious of time, so we'll start to whiz through these. So some metrics that you might want to consider. All this stuff is great, but reporting resilience is really the key. So boards need to know about this stuff, how the business is protected. So you've got, mean time to respond, mean time to detect, success rates for backups, how many percentage wise, how many of those are verified, how many are usable, how 100% I can get all those back, no problem. Here's the evidence to prove it. Hopefully that's the result. Incident readiness, so you can score yourself. How ready are you as an organization to respond and recover? How you measure yourself against recovery time objectives. Do you fit within the business's maximum allowable downtime? All stuff that's not new, but when we apply it to resilience, can really help demonstrate and evidence that you are, ready and able to survive in the worst case. Obviously, patch management, again, everyone's favorite thing. How long does it take to apply updates to vulnerable systems? So recommendations there for how to report back to the board. So we'll come back to future proofing. So looking at, setting strategy for 2026. How do we navigate that? Well, again, board engagement. This is a key to building a resilient and forward-looking strategy. Boards absolutely should be front and center and own cyber governance. Sorry. So maybe some of you are the board representative, maybe some of you report into a board representative. It absolutely needs to be on the agenda. So proactive risk management, resilience, and security investment, that all comes from that board level engagement within the organization. Strategic alignment. So cybersecurity, obviously, it's not an island. It should absolutely fit into the wider business strategy. It's never going to be a technical afterthought, because then it won't achieve its aims. It won't be there to support the business. Cybersecurity needs to be that enabler within an organization. So it can't just sit by itself. A risk-based approach, excuse me. So yeah, very much focusing on what the business impact of those cyber risks are. Is it financial, reputational, operational? So whilst technical metrics are important and useful, the board are going to want to see those business impact side of things. So how much is that going to cost us if it goes wrong? What's the downtime if this happens? The 5 core principles I've written on here. So that's risk management, strategy, people, incident planning, and assurance. So when you have those conversations with the board, those are the things that you need to be talking about. So there's some of these things on here already, but those five core principles are they're NCSE core principles, so you can look them up. But absolutely need to be baked into those conversations and ultimately your strategy as well. Actionable metrics. So again, we come back to the metrics, but it's got to be metrics that aid decision making, from a business perspective. So, recovery times, what are your key scenario exposures? How mature are your controls? Again, that's the conversation that the board's going to want to have and they're going to want to see. And finally, on here, governance and oversight. So, absolutely clear accountability. So, boards need to have that accountability. Someone on the board needs to have that accountability for overseeing the strategy and making sure that that the business is executing on that strategy, and you have confidence in that strategy as well. So again, talk to the board. It's their responsibility. Um, a little bit the level of detail lower, I suppose. What we see as being core components of a strategy for moving into 2026. AI security, if you're not actively using AI tools within your environment, that's fine. Somebody probably is, though. So someone's using GPT or Copilot or Gemini within your organization. So set your stall out now, put the policy in place, put the controls in place. It's here, it's with us. So start to understand how it affects you and build it into a strategic roadmap as well. Proactive exposure definitely should be in your strategy. So looking at continuous real-time visibility into things like vulnerability, identity. Dashboards are great. You need to set an expectation on having at the drop of a hat, if you like, having a view of where you are within your organization at any given time in terms of vulnerabilities. AI again, so look at native security platforms, native security tooling. See if that fits within your strategy. Domain specific language models, things like that. So not just general, the general chat GPT that anyone can access. See if it's an option for you to have your own internal instance of that. Again, brings in that control and that governance element, helps you secure it as well. Resilience and response. So again, not just on the defensive perimeter, but focusing on that resilience aspect. So how do we recover? How do we absorb attacks? How do we keep going? What does our threat landscape look like? Absolutely should be built into the strategy. And finally, IAM. So identity is going to be a big thing we think for 2026. Authentication is 99% of how threat actors get into an organization. So securing your IAM absolutely needs to be a focus and built into a strategy for 2026 as well. And as we move forward, again, more questions to ask yourself as you set your roadmap out. AI, like it or love it, it's here. Have a look at your risk, the risk landscape for this year coming, what's out there that you think may affect you. Regulations, again, here to stay. You may or may not have to adhere to them, but certainly need to be aware of them. Is there anything on there that's going to, fundamentally impact you or change the way you need to do things? Supply chain and resilience. So yeah, as we've talked about, supply chain attacks absolutely are the hot thing at the moment for organizations. How well do you know or trust your own supply chain? Resilience, again, as we've spent some time talking about, build for resilience. Any new projects moving forward, any transformation that may be happening, resilience is absolutely key in making sure that your business can survive. And finally, of course, the strategy that you set aligns with the wider business. A lot of this stuff we talk about may not be relevant for you. Maybe there is no desire in the business to use AI, and maybe it's all banned. In which case, that's fine. Leave it out of your strategy. whatever you do come up with absolutely is there to support the business moving forward. So what you write into your strategy, that should absolutely be the key focus is, how does it support the business? How does it enable people to do their jobs in a secure fashion? Cool. Very, very quickly, we'll just talk about our own Assure Map process. So this is a cyber maturity assessment that Cyber One offers. It gives you a really, really good, set of now, next, and later. Where are we today? What are the quick wins, easy wins, and what can we do later to help us be secure? So it's a great way of converting kind of technical findings into that kind of board ready insight and assurance. As part of the process, we take the time to understand, how mature you are as an organization, people, processes, all that kind of stuff. But Assure Map can give you, a really good starting point to help mature your business's cybersecurity, and you can feed that into the board, feed that into your strategy moving forward. And finally, if anyone would like to know more, like to have a conversation about any of the topics we've discussed, feel free. Book a free 30-minute conversation if you follow that link. And we will be happy to discuss those topics in more detail. As I said, these slides will be available as part of the recording anyway, or if you take a screenshot of that, book yourself a consultation. So that's the end of the presentation. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I shall dive into the Q&A, and let's see what we've got in here. Max, have you seen much use of digital twins of estates being used to model incident blast radius and test response plans? Yes, is the short answer, Max. We have seen digital twins increasingly being used out there. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the concept, as the name suggests, you basically create a copy of the production environment, and then you use that to sort of conduct live fire exercises against to measure, how impactful an attack would be, what data would potentially be at risk and stuff like that. So it's increasingly becoming popular, Max. A lot of the time is, it's the budget and the time and the effort that's holding a lot of organizations back. But for those that do invest in it, it can be a really, really great way of providing that assurance at a relatively low risk, but also helps organizations really understand, truly, how things would happen in the real world. You can get some great results out of it in terms of, rebuilding plans and things like that. Another question here from Mattia. Historically, blue teams tend to be one step behind red teams. Yep. I guess, is that the same for AI, or does that somewhat level the playing field from what you have seen? That's a really interesting question. So, um, I think that maxim still kind of holds to a certain point. So blue teams still tend to be somewhat reactive to what the bad guys are doing when it comes to AI. Some of what we see, I'd say we're sort of on par. So traditional things, if I can call them that, like phishing and stuff like that. So even AI-enabled phishing is still phishing. It's just slightly more convincing phishing. But some attacks, for example, I think on the blue team side, unfortunately, we are slightly lagging behind on the defensive side when it comes to like agentic based attacks and things like that, simply because the tooling, the response tooling isn't quite operating at the same scale as the attackers' AI infrastructure. So yeah, really good question. And I think we are unfortunately still slightly on the back foot from a blue team perspective when it comes to AI. Cool. I think that's all the questions in the Q&A. Thank you once again, everybody, for attending the webinar. Hopefully you found it valuable. As I said, if you want to book a conversation or a consultation, please do go to this link. I'm quite happy to have a 30-minute chat about anything that we've talked about today. I appreciate we covered a lot of ground, so there may be something you want to dive into in a bit more detail. But If there are no more questions, I'll leave you all to the rest of your afternoon. And thanks once again.